taking that first step. If you've got guys on your team or gals on your team that have military experience, that sat in the seat, listen to that. What does your product not do right now? And what should it do?
Thousands of companies show up to sell their technology to the U.S. Department of Defense each year. But so few will transition from proof of concept to true production across the valley of death. The select few who do, their stories are rarely told. Until now. I'm Noah Scheinbaum, and this is Crossing the Valley. ZeroEyes is an AI-based weapons detection platform. The company's software integrates into existing security camera systems and sends out alerts when verified weapons are detected. The founding team is made up of Navy SEALs and military veterans with over 50 years of special operations and intelligence community expertise. But the company didn't start in the federal market. In fact, its founding dates back to the Parkland school shooting. CEO and founder Mike Laif was walking his daughter to class and saw the cameras in her school that could prevent a school shooting. ZeroEyes initially focused on the education market, then pivoted to commercial space as schools were shut down during COVID. They entered the Department of Defense opportunistically, and in some ways in reverse order. It was one of their first contracts that yielded a follow-on production deal. And since they've signed more than 10 different research and development agreements to develop applications of their technology. They're still very much grappling with the path ahead. And we're pleased to be joined by Marine and SVP of Sales at ZeroEyes, JT Wilkins. All right, so JT Wilkins, thank you so much for joining us today on Crossing the Valley. We're psyched to have you to talk a little bit about the ZeroEyes trajectory. I want to start with you. Maybe give us a little bit of the background on ZeroEyes. What do y'all do? Why is this mission so important?
Yeah, man, absolutely. So super excited to be on. Thanks for having us. It's an interesting mission. So it's a little bit different than what most AI companies are out here doing. And I would almost call it like a noble mission that we're after right now. So ZeroEyes is ultimately a software company. We use an artificial intelligence algorithm that can identify brandished firearms underneath existing security cameras. The whole idea is when you look back into the last 50 years of active shooter data, what we've been finding is that those weapons are brandished for a period of time before the first shot's ever fired. And the goal is that early identification of a firearm could potentially save lives. And so our goal is to save time and save lives, give those precious seconds, those minutes back to first responders, school teacher administrators, folks that are working in an office building to shelter in place, do their run, hide, fight, all of those things. So taking a traditionally reactive system and making it proactive through computer vision.
It's an incredible mission. And when you think about defense technology, there's typically somebody on the other side of it saying, no, don't do that. I'm trying really hard to imagine who the opponent is to ZeroEyes technology. Maybe a privacy advocate. I'm not sure. Have you guys found any?
Yeah, I think across the board, right? And whether it's commercial, SLED, or federal sector, there's always going to be someone that's the naysayer, right? And I think that's, unfortunately the same folks that say, well, we've always done it this way. And so we're just going to continue on and do that. No, we take a really strong, stance on the privacy requirements from our customers. And that's across the board for, our preschool clients to our Department of Defense clients, right across the entire space. And so it's really important that we shelter our clients from any privacy concerns that they might have. Diving into that. So the first thing is we only detect a firearm. It's a bounding box that goes around something that looks like a gun. If it doesn't look like a gun, then it's not going to get picked up, or at least it shouldn't, right? I mean, no AI is perfect, and we're the first ones to come out and say that, which is why we have an operations center that filters every alert out. But ultimately, I could strap this, gun to a dog and have it run in front of a camera, and it's just going to pick up the gun. That's the goal. So with that we don't introduce the bias concerns that, facial recognition and other type of object detection analytics would in that environment. Switching gears a little bit on the federal side, that's less of a concern because you kind of waive your right to privacy when you enter a federal installation. On the SLED and the commercial side, extremely, extremely important. So we have to balance that out in what we choose to work on the federal side, and then what we do on our commercial and SLED end.
It's great. You're teasing a few of the points we'll get into, which is that y'all have a very multifaceted business, and you're serving some different customers. Before we dive in too much into the business, though, I want to start with you, with JT. So really kind of a fantastic background in service to the country in a variety of military roles for a number of years, and then you've had some roles on the private side as well. Tell us a little bit about that background and why it led you to join ZeroEyes as the SVP of Sales today.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely took a different approach, I think, than most. And I would argue that most people in our organization took that different approach as well. And I think it's why we all mesh so well together and why the culture is the way that it is. So I joined the Marine Corps in 2006, wanted to go fight for my country and do everything, following 9/11 and all the attacks that happened. I spent almost 15 years in the Marine Corps. I medically retired in 2020. I spent about half of that time in the Special Operations Forces. And I was really lucky in my last couple of years in the military to be able to sit on the other side of the table from some vendors that were looking to do business with us. Now, I wasn't a contracting officer, and I wasn't in a place where I could make any decision other than being, one of those probably frozen middle influencers, I guess is the best way to call it. Although I would say that our organization acted a little bit faster than others just because of the job that we were trying to accomplish. So I was really fortunate to understand what the requirement cycle looked like and what different pots of money did for us, and ultimately how we could leverage those to purchase technologies and equipment to make our warfighters better and faster and more efficient. Once I got out of the military, I had a couple of different approaches. In fact, I was in Iraq in January of 2020, and I was out at the end of March of 2020. Prior to going on my last deployment, I had an offer as a management consultant coming directly out of active duty, went through kind of one of those JMO programs. And then, timing being what it was, I got out directly during COVID, at the height of it, March of 2020. So I got the dreaded email that said, "Hey, look, we're pushing your offer back, 6 months," or something along those lines. And I was like, all right, well, it's time to go back to work. I got to go find something because I'm getting ready to go on terminal leave and figure that out. So I put the feelers out to my network, and I came across a small defense startup called Immersive Wisdom. I joined them. I was on board the team, I think, as employee number 7. So, as small as you could be, as agile as you could be. We went to market in the defense space. So that's really, I got, trial by fire, small company, figured out the SBIR and the phase 3 and the OTA work and all the different consortiums and stuff that I needed to go out and work with. And I stayed with them for about 15 months. In that period of time, funny enough, I ran into ZeroEyes at Tyndall Air Force Base. We were both doing some work down there. ZeroEyes was trying to come in and get a contract with Tyndall based on some of the AFWERX challenges that were out there at the time. Immersive Wisdom had already won a contract to support Ghost Robotics, like the robot dogs that are out there. And so we were working together to do an integration to do the gun detection on Tyndall through the Immersive Wisdom platform. The more and more I peeled back the layers with the company, the more and more I fell in love with the mission. Looking at the problem that the company's trying to solve, having kids myself that were school age, it was terrifying, right? And 2020 isn't very far removed from 2018, the Parkland shooting, which was, one of the greatest tragedies in our country's history. So that was fun, fresh in my mind. So a few months later came by, continued to fall in love with the mission. I gave our current senior vice president of strategy, Dustin Kissling, a call. And I was like, "Hey man, look, I'm over here doing defense work with Immersive Wisdom. I know ZeroEyes doesn't have a defense guy that's full time. You've been kind of dual hatting that. Let me know, if you've got a role opening." And so, went through the interview process and just had to wait for our Series A to close out in August of 21. I've been here ever since. So started off as the VP of Federal. So I grew our federal business from the kind of the ground up. There was a little bit of work that had been done previously, but again, trying to scale a SLED business and a commercial business and then doing all the intricacies that come along with Fed, it just wasn't the highest priority at the time for the organization. Bringing somebody on full time to be able to do that, I think was the next step in our growth phase following the Series A. Since then, been able to build out a team underneath of me. I transitioned into the head of sales role about a year and a half after growing the federal side, and the team's just crushing it right now in the Fed space. So we're super excited with the growth on the federal end, both in the DoD as well as the Department of Veteran Affairs, which is giving back to our vets, which is awesome.
It's a great story, JT. I mean, one, and it just even 15 months learning a new market. Obviously, we're in the military service, but 15 months to get up to speed on the sales side of things is actually no time at all, right? That's actually quite quick. So kudos to you on that rapid learning. You hit on a couple of things that I think are really important, and we're going to go deep into a few of them. One, you talked about being on base with another company, Immersive Wisdom and ZeroEyes integrating with it. I think it's really key, and we should just share with our listeners that a key part of the ZeroEyes strategy really is integration, right? You all don't own necessarily the hardware that you deploy your software into. And so maybe just talk for a minute or two about that, JT, of how the product actually works and why that makes it so attractive to customers.
Yeah, exactly. So, for us, we do one thing really, really well, and it's detect brandished firearms off of existing security cameras. How those alerts get to our clients is the most important side of our integration. The latency and any delay is the difference between potentially life and death in our scenarios. And that's obviously something we take very, very seriously. So our integration primarily revolves around our reporting mechanisms and how we get that information out to different clients, whether that's an access control button where they can lock down a facility, or it's a mass notification device that can get out to lots of different people at any given time, or it flows into a security operations center's monitoring system that they already have, whether that's a common operating picture or a video management system, something along those lines. So integration is super key for us. To your point, we are just software. So we've got, a hardware load that we deploy out to our clients and put on-prem, an on-prem device to be able to go out and deploy in most cases. So we try to make that seamless on our end because we've got that spec'd out. We've got that figured out. But the alerting mechanism is the most important thing, as well as, just like AI and any other software, hardware is evolving all the time. And given that we're a company that prides itself on working with almost every camera manufacturer that's on the market today, we have to do a lot of updates and a lot of dev work to make sure that we're on the forefront of keeping up with the manufacturers.
No, and that I think is important because a lot of companies that enter this market, especially talk about kind of owning a deployment environment and or wanting to be a prime. It's a theme that we hear a lot, especially in the venture-backed community. But really what that entails is not what a young company often wants to do. It's a lot of administration. It's a lot of logistics. It's a lot of integrating other solutions into your own. And so I think just being really clear about that up front is absolutely an asset especially for a younger company. There was another point you made, JT, that you threw around SLED and you threw out rest of federal. ZeroEyes didn't start with the Department of Defense, right? Despite the fact that you and that the founders come from military backgrounds, special operations backgrounds. You all did not begin with DoD. Talk a little bit about why and what the strategy was in the early days of the company.
Yeah. I think it probably is worth just going back to our founding story and just talk about why we exist today, right? And so I touched on it earlier about the Parkland shooting in 2018. Shortly after that shooting, schools around the nation started implementing lockdown drills, the run, hide, fight thing. Our CEO, Mike, his daughter was in school. I think she was in middle school timeframe of her life. And they did their first active shooter drill. She came home, obviously pretty upset having experienced that. I'm sure, she'd seen some things on the news and, asked the question like, hey, Dad, is my school next? Why are we doing this? A few days later, they happened to be on campus. Mike was walking through the hallway and outside and saw that there was cameras on the walls every 20 to 40 feet or so up in the ceilings on pole mounted cameras in the parking lots, and happened to see the school resource officer or the security guard and just stopped and asked him, who's watching your cameras for you? And the short answer was no one. We don't have the staffing to do it, and nor is it possible to watch 150 cameras at any given time with a set of eyeballs. And that was really the spark for ZeroEyes. If you can identify people and license plates and all these other types of objects off of an existing camera, why can't we detect guns and try to protect privacy along with that by not identifying a human? So fast forward a few years later, brought the product to market. So of course, right around the time that I was getting out of the military, so was ZeroEyes in terms of going with its product launch. So January of 2020, company had impeccable timing with COVID. Started implementing this in schools around the nation. Schools very quickly let out because of COVID and were out for quite some time. So we had to make a quick pivot into the commercial sector. And what we found is we fit very squarely into some of the duty of care requirements by commercial entities to protect their staff and their consumers when they come on site and they come on their property. Fast forward another year or so, we got approached by a prime about doing some subcontract work on a modernization project with the Jake at the time, I guess, or CDAO now rebranded, and did a modernization of the G-Ball system, which is kind of that optical looking trailer that sits out on fobs and cops for threat detection. And so that project went on for a while. We did some great work with the DoD, with the Army, but it was a short-term project for us. Shortly thereafter, we won our first phase 1 SBIR through AFWorks, did a little bit of work there. And then I joined the company, and shortly thereafter, we competed against the AFWorks challenge for flight line security down at Tyndall Air Force Base. So this kind of leads into, we did a little bit of work on the front end, SBIR phase 1, you did your initial customer discovery type stuff. But there really wasn't any big contract that was coming out of that or anything that was specifically like a next step after that phase 1. So the AFWorks Challenge, we brought our commercial product to market. We brought it to the event, showcased where it was deployed throughout the country. And then ultimately we're down selected, into like the last 10 or so companies, and then finally made the final funding cutoff to be deployed operationally at Tyndall Air Force Base. Fast forward now, I guess 3 years or so since that initial deployment, I think we're the last company left out of that challenge that's sitting down there, and it's production deployment for us. So that's pretty cool. So taking that kind of opposite approach from the going in with the SBIR, and really we started our first effort with growing in the commercial sector, bringing into the DoD in a production contract, and then starting down the SBIR route.
It's kind of a wild story. I mean, in many ways, it's kind of a story of perseverance and adaptation, right? You all started in education, which I think for listeners will be very clear, obvious, and core to the business, right? School shooting makes sense to sell to schools. COVID happens. There are no schools for the better part of a year in much of the country, or maybe even longer. And so you move to commercial, things like department stores, malls, other large box retailers. And from there, you now built a track record of success that made you appealing not only to the government, to a prime, first of all, that was interested in y'all coming in some context, and then to the government, not on necessarily a research and development basis exclusively, but actually made you competitive for an AFWorks challenge. Some listeners might not be familiar with AFWorks challenge. We've talked on the show about defense innovation units, commercial solutions solutions offerings. AFWorks has something similar. Can you just, JT, explain a little bit more about what is an AFWorks challenge and how did that process work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think each year, and they're continuing them to this day, each year they come out with a focus area, right? And that generally ties back into NDAA and the strategic vision for the Air Force and kind of those big items that come out of the strategic vision from the Pentagon, right? And then they ultimately filter their way down into actionable priorities by the innovation units throughout the Department of Defense. The Air Force, I think, is on the forefront of all things innovation across the DoD. They have a really great program with the SBIR, with the AFWorks, just AFWorks in general, running that portfolio. So the challenges come down for a very specific need. They say, hey, look, here's our areas of concern. In this case, it was the flight line of the future. They were looking for all things from foreign object debris detection on runways to security to, how to make maintainers faster and better on the ground. But ultimately tied back into that focus area of that 21st century flight line. If you're not familiar, Tyndall got destroyed by Hurricane Michael in 2018. The entire base was pretty much wiped out underwater, and they had to rebuild from scratch. So the Air Force took that as an opportunity to say, look, we have our opportunity to create the installation of the future. And so ever since 2018, the rebuild has been focused on how do we make a digitally connected air base that the rest of the Air Force can follow against. So the Flight Line Challenge came out. We went through a couple of iterations. It was a mixture of, I think you submit a white paper, then you go into a pitch, and then ultimately make your way out to AFWorks in Vegas to sit down in person with your stakeholders, do another pitch and do a showcase of your technology. A few weeks later, we were notified of the down select in the award, that came through as a commercial solutions opening was the call, and was issued a FAR-based contract on the backside of that. So it was pretty cool. And again, having our gun detection running on Tyndall Air Force Base cameras, operated by the security forces team is like, I think, a major win on our side, especially that early into the DoD.
Yeah, no, it's pretty cool. And especially given that so far federal acquisition regulation based contract going through a fair and open competition up front also gives you sole source authority on the back end, right? The ability of additional customers to acquire that capability without having to recompete in the future.
Exactly right. Yep.
So yeah, it's a pretty unique kind of piece to have in an acquisition toolkit. So you guys have gone through that. You're still at Tyndall Air Force Base. You've moved now from that kind of initial challenge to a production contract. So talk to us, JT, a little bit about what that process was like. It was as simple as customer says, we like this, we're up for another year, or what had to happen there?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different things. Defense adaptation of a commercial product is always a little interesting. Everything from the network regulations with regards to an authority to operate or an interim authority to test and who has to approve that and the different networks. It was definitely a challenge. Contracting was the easy part that we got through that pretty easy upon selection. Moving into actually on the production side and leveraging our commercial tech was actually the harder part. And what we found very quickly is that in the Air Force or in the DoD really as a whole, a lot of different people own a lot of different networks on any given base. And it's an interesting process when you're bridging those different commands that are on the base that are owned by different entities across the Air Force. And so what we quickly learned is we had to figure out who owned what network, how to, splice the network, for lack of better words, to get our alerts back to where we need them to get to at the Base Defense Operations Center. And then what authorities that we needed in order to get the thumbs up. So it probably took us somewhere in the ballpark of 6 to 7 months after the contract was issued just to be able to go down and start doing the implementation, simply because of the red tape that was involved with connecting to an existing network. Even though for us, like on the security side, camera network doesn't touch an operational network, right? But they treat it almost the same. So we have to meet the requirements that come along with that.
6 to 7 months to get to even just to begin implementation.
Yeah, just to begin the implementation. And so from there, we finally got implemented on a subset of the initial cameras. And it took us more time to get another authority, but we got it up and running. We got it working. We did the testing with the Security Forces Defenders. And I mean, ultimately, when they ran through their testing, what they found is, hey, this is a pretty big game changer for us in terms of our active shooter response plans. If we know we have cameras in a certain locations and we've got ZeroEyes on those cameras, even if we can't prevent it, we at least know where to start rather than locking down the whole base and experiencing that headache of searching each individual vehicle, figuring out what's going on inside the installation. So there was immediate ROI for the customer on that side, which was pretty cool to hear that even after just a handful of our cameras up and running on the platform.
Absolutely. No, and you got to deliver that value to keep folks fighting for you on the inside, right? Because it's no small task to get some of those things passed. But I mean, since this show is particularly focused on tactics, I'm gonna continue to probe even deeper to the extent that you're able to share. Who was carrying the water for you on the inside? Who was championing this effort? And what did it look like when you show up and you're like, okay, we got to connect to this network or that camera? How do you actually get that done as a company working from the outside?
Yeah. So I think this comes back to everybody's favorite topic, which is relationships, right? And fortunately, after coming from Immersive Wisdom to ZeroEyes, I had amassed a few relationships down at Tyndall with an active contract. One of those being with the current, or at the time, it was the current director of innovation for the Security Forces Squadron. He actually ended up on the AFWorks Challenge, side of the house. Immediately after doing our initial demo and pitch of the capability and talking to him, he's like, this is a no-brainer. We need this across all of our bases. This is such a game changer for the way that we respond. And so got the opportunity after going through from him over to the Security Forces commander at the time. He was super forward-leaning on all things innovation. He brought the robot dogs to Tyndall. He brought the digital twin of the entire installation to Tyndall. was a big person in terms of, the reshaping effort of what Tyndall Air Force Base looked like in the reconstruction. And so having that support from that side, and, he pressed the I believe button pretty early on. It was a pretty easy transition for us into that. So I think that was the number one thing. And then the number two was we had a handful of clients at that point, or I think probably more than just a handful of clients on the state and local and the commercial side. So being able to point to saying like, look, this is being in use. This is in use at this school district. It's in use in this office building. People are using this on the outside, getting law enforcement testimonials on the backside to speak to our defense clients was absolutely paramount in making this happen as fast as it did.
The relationship piece, I agree. It's talked about a lot, but that's probably because there's no substitute for it. How do you think about this for other companies that maybe don't have a JT Wilkins who has spent time on site in an installation where you're deploying? Should they be looking to hire from the customer organization? Is there another way to develop those relationships? What advice would you have for others who may be in a similar position?
Yeah. So, to your point, like there's no substitute for having the boots on the ground relationship. I think that's super important. On the flip side of that, if you've got a technology that's in need and it meets the requirements that a service currently has open, I think in a lot of ways it'll stand for itself, right? There's a lot of companies that do this cradle to grave, enter in through some of the challenges to the pitch day events, with organizations like SoftWorks and the broader Defense Works, ERDIC Works, AFWorks, all these things. They've got these opportunities to get out and pitch your technology to a group of stakeholders that are willing to listen. There's a lot of different organizations out there that offer consulting services to bring value to your organization. Some of them are really good. Others are iffy, and some are really bad. They'll just eat up a lot of dollars out of your budget to kind of get you nowhere. Balancing that line, depending on where you're at as an organization, is super important. And knowing, do I need to spend $15,000 on a consultant for a phase one? Probably not. That's probably the result of that. In order to get yourself to that phase two, phase three, more strategic customers, opening those doors, maybe it does make sense for you. But while there's no one singular pathway to defense acquisitions at scale, it is at this point a little bit more mapped out for folks depending on how deep you want to go. And I think it's important to find, a mentor is always great. That's certainly what I look for in my network early on, was just to be able to bounce ideas off of things and, maybe not go super in depth or any type of competition, but just to be able to talk through a process and where to start, and do we miss things? Just because, as you well know, defense opportunities aren't all posted in one place, aren't all advertised, and so you need that kind of behind the doors look sometimes.
It's a common theme. You need a guide, and they can come in many forms. They can come from many places, but there's really no substitute. You guys got down to Tyndall on this kind of first, out of the challenge, and you mentioned, hey, and we think we might be the last company standing of the group that came in through that. As you started the work, you started the installation, you started the deployment, what were the milestones that you were marching towards that let you say, hey, we're crushing this, like this is working, and allowed you to frame ROI very clearly to your customer?
Yeah, I think for ZeroEyes, right, ours is it's pretty easy to show our ROI. Detect a gun off of a camera and try to stop an active shooter. In many cases, we also recognize we're solving the 1% problem that's going to have the greatest impact on your organization forever. So specifically with Tyndall, what was interesting is they actually had an event a few months before we got implemented on base. There was somebody called in an active threat on the installation. They locked down. Almost immediately it was like, all right, we've got to speed this process up for ZeroEyes. So looking back at our milestones and the things that we wanted to hit, obviously it was number one. How is it that we get connected on the network? What are the things that we need to do? Who's going to carry that water for us inside of the organization to make that happen? And so luckily, the commander at the time was willing to do that for us and made a lot of phone calls that likely wouldn't have happened, or it would have been a much more arduous process without that support. So bridging that network was the number one to be able to get implemented. Number two was a military installation has a lot of guns on it. on a regular basis. And so being able to differentiate and help the security forces team, defenders on site there, differentiate the difference between a threat and a non-threat, and being able to go through that training cycle and even do an active shooter drill with them to show the differences of if you implement ZeroEyes or if you don't. And then lastly, it's making it a tool that they want to use, making it super simple. So I'm a Marine, right? Knuckle dragger came out, from the enlisted side of the house. If it's not doable in a button click or two, people aren't going to use it. And that's just, the more complicated that you make it, if you need a data science degree to operate a system, your end users are not going to do that. When you've got an E3 or an E4 sitting behind the keyboard, making a decision, they're not going to do it. So making sure that your software is extremely user friendly has got to be number one. So that was super important, was to get that feedback from the end user and make sure that this was actually a usable software for them on site to make the determination of gun or no gun very, very quickly. And I'd say lastly, we worked with a partner company that was down there as well. And they did a simulation. So there's a school that is semi-serviced by the security forces team right outside the gate at Tyndall Air Force Base. They have no cameras on site, but the Tyndall still wanted to do kind of a scenario where if they put cameras in the school, and they implemented their response drills, what would that look like? And so they ran through 3 scenarios. The first scenario was, there was an active shooter that started from the parking lot, and that active shooter's goal was to get to the principal's office and take the shot. So they did their first implementation, which was just a normal security forces response. It took them, I can't remember the exact time frame of what it was, but let's say it was 7 minutes it took them to get to the response. And ultimately the shooter was able to make it to the principal's office. The next iteration was, same response, but with a tactical team. I think they were able to reduce that by about a minute or so for that response time, because they were still ultimately waiting for that 911 call to come in to make the response. And then lastly, they did a simulation with ZeroEyes, with cameras on site. And we were able to cut that down almost in half from the time that the security forces or the shooter left the vehicle with the weapon brandished to the time that security forces got on site and were able to neutralize the threat. So that was a huge piece for us when it came to being able to show the ROI. Was like, look, guys, this is, here's the data right here. You can see it.
Oh, it's huge. I mean, that's it. It sort of gets to the value of, of exercises. We talk about test and evaluation from time to time. And that is just a very clear, there's a control group and there's a test group. And when the data is that clear, when the result is that clear, it's got to feel really good. So no, that makes all the sense in the world. And, so you guys have clearly built phenomenal relationships and a solid track record at Tyndall. Talk to us now about how do you think, so that's Tyndall. How do you think about going from one to many as you think about scaling inside the Department of Defense? I know it's a fight that is still underway. What's the strategy? How are you all thinking about that piece of the transition?
Yeah, I think like most companies, right, our end state goal is, enter into some type of program of record, right? That's where we all want to get to someday. But it's definitely a valley in between where where you start at to where you end. So right now we've after the Tyndall effort, we've been fortunate. We've been awarded 7 directive phase 2 or phase 2 SBIRs. I think about 5 of those are directive phase 2. A whole bunch of phase 1s as a part of that. So I think somewhere in the ballpark of 12 total SBIR awards across the company. And the beauty of what we're doing is it's all building off of the core technology and making it better for the end user, with the intent of being able to transition that all into a longer term contract. So right now, as most companies are out there right now, we're waiting to hear what's going to happen with our Strat 5 from the Air Force, the strategic funding increase off of one of our phase 2. That's our current transition pathway. But we've got some other efforts that are out there as well. So the SBIR has been awesome for us. Being able to show our commercialization of the technology, the growth of the technology year over year as we approach AFWERX or we approach the Navy or the Army with these efforts, it's huge. It just shows that we have our ability to do our job, that we're going to be able to do this at scale, and that the company is going to be there after the first tranche of phase 2 funding, dries up. So we talked a little bit about it earlier, but our largest effort we currently have going on is with the Army, which we have no contracts with. Nothing on paper that is a current contract. And this goes all the way back to our efforts with the GBOSS and our subcontract from almost 4 years ago now, where the Army identified and said, hey, look, we have a gap on our installations for an active shooter defense system. And after looking at ZeroEyes and the threat detection capabilities that we offer, one of the requirements division came to us and said, hey, look, this is something that we want to do. Can you share more with us? So we started going down the path of doing exercises with that organization, testing the technology in different environments, having real world end users, the soldiers actually sitting behind the system and operating it, and leveraging some of that Air Force Phase 2 work for the Department of the Army. What they found on the backside of that is it said, hey, look, this is a real need. This is a real gap that we have. And if you look at the statistics around active threats, government facilities are not immune. I think it's the data shows 1 out of every 5 active threats happens on government property. That's a huge driver towards we need to protect our soldiers and our families and our service members on these installations.
Absolutely. A lot to tease out here. 7 phase 2 SBIRs, 12 total. It's a lot of SBIRs. Each Small Business Innovation Research Award is theoretically for distinct and new technology, right? And so, and yet riding off of a common platform. So let's do that first. Explain to us, how do you leverage the SBIR program to, whether it's by different customer or different application, what makes those each distinct and unique?
So, we look at it, right, just like most companies, this is paid IRAD, right? The ability to go in and build out new capability that ultimately transitions over to our commercial customers, our SLED customers in that space. So each one's for a different problem set, obviously. And I think, but to a certain extent, they build off of one another. The Air Force recently invested heavily in the agile combat employment space. The island hopping campaign in the Pacific for the fight against China, moving aircraft from location to location very, very quickly so they can stay out of range and out of the timing of a Chinese ballistic missile, and based on the ranges that are as such. So that's kind of the ACE concept in a nutshell. After our success at Tyndall, a number of our stakeholders looked at this and really said, man, this is a capability that we need in our expeditionary environment, not just in our at home, on base, try to solve this problem. So our first 2 SBIRs were designed around, the robotic application for installation security. So the first one was flying a drone with analytics on it, to be able to identify, potential threats that are on the compound. That one specifically is, a camera detects somebody with a firearm, a drone goes out and responds and provides that situational awareness to first responders to get there and neutralize the threat. Second one is building off of our work down at Tyndall, where they've got the robot dogs. And so, unfortunately, the way that the robot dogs were set up is to be more of an integration platform, right? And to let software be implemented on those platforms to do all sorts of different jobs. Tyndall had their setup automated, but the problem was somebody still had to watch the feed that was coming off of the dog. And so with leveraging our analytics and adding some additional analytics on top of the dog, we're able to make that into, it's truly an autonomous platform that's going out and doing its roving patrol and then coming back, and it's alerting if it sees something that is potentially a threat. Both of those have some expeditionary capability, but they were specifically designed for a military installation. Switching gears, the rest of these have been mainly focused on what happens when I land a C-17 on a dirt strip in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And it's a semi-permissive environment where there might be bad guys there might not be bad guys there. How do we protect our troops that are on the ground? Well, currently, that results in a bunch of defenders, of security forces guys, or Marines or soldiers running out of the back of the ramp and sitting real close to the aircraft and providing that close-in support to try to protect the aircraft and the assets that are being pulled off. Having a multi-thousand gallon fuel bladder with a bunch of JP8 or whatever, jet fuel in it isn't exactly somewhere you want to be standing at if you're getting shot at. So our idea, with all of these is how do we increase the standoff distance for that aircraft, for that crew. And that's where all of these have kind of come together. But each individual sensor is a whole different problem. So we're working with a company right now that has the capability of dropping a sensor from a drone up to, I think it's 100 meters off the ground. It lands, it's totally okay, and it can start sending data back off of that robot. We've got another one that's a low size, weight, and power camera system that can go out and be dropped off in the middle of nowhere, sit there for, it can run for 36 to 48 hours in a low power mode, and it's looking for a threat object that's out there. So it's kind of along those lines where it's all that common theme of security, but it's different work with different platforms, because even though it's a similar capability or a similar end state goal, it's a completely different R&D process when you're going from a drone to a dog to a low size, weight, power thing to dropping a camera from 100 feet off the ground. A lot of different things can happen. So that's kind of the end state of what we've been working on.
No, it's super interesting to hear that. And I think this is a really important lesson for companies, or an important model for companies to consider, especially in the software world, which is that you all are not selling a product off the shelf. You're creating solutions to meet different, warfighter needs, or different, end user needs. And so, having that backbone of a really robust object detection platform is great. But like you said, I mean, if you're wedded to, hey, this is the widget we sell, and it's only this widget, that's going to put you in a pretty narrow box for a customer that, just doesn't buy product quite that way. And so it's really neat to hear how you all have been able to tailor the underlying technology and the approach and the relationships that you have to get into a bunch of these different fights. And it's sort of a portfolio approach. It's probably unlikely that all 7 of those different use cases scale up and become massive programs. But you don't need that for the business to be successful, right? You've kind of put yourself in a bunch of different fights. You've given yourself a bunch of different bites at the apple, or taken a bunch of different swings. And now you can kind of continue to invest behind the ones that succeed and the ones that the government decides to fully fund. So I think that's it's a really illustrative use case, a really illustrative example for companies that are thinking about how to bring their product to market in what looks like, a huge customer, but we know is, quite fragmented, and each corner of the Pentagon is looking for something different.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I always come back to like Semper Gumby, right? You just have to be flexible in the way that you do business with the government. We learned very, very early on that our commercial offering didn't meet all of the needs that the DoD customer was looking for. And that's why we made the decision to go down the SBIR route, is to look at, okay, how can we get paid to do some R&D here, but actually deliver real value back to our customers. And the beauty of it is, so far, is all these different tools that we've built, it's wildly exceeded the customer's, desires for what they were looking for. And it's allowed us to open additional doors inside of the Department of Defense. I think for a lot of companies out there, right, you have to be willing to endure some of the pain. And obviously, a lot of different companies have different financial backing and what that looks like and how much pain you can endure based on a financial perspective. But there's a lot of free stuff that's going to be required of you. And I think that's what a lot of folks don't realize going into the Department of Defense and looking at this $880 billion portfolio that's out there, which it's great. It's a great TAM to get after, but the reality is it's going to take many, many years to get there. And I think, I saw this chart recently, and it showed sort of the transition timeline and process. And, it said, if you want to be $100 million company, the DoD is a great way to get there in 15 years. If you want to be a $100 million company in 5 years, the DoD is not the way to get there. And, and I think it's because of that persistence and that effort. And that doesn't mean that you can't make good money inside the defense space in that 5 to 15 year gap. It just means you have to be willing to endure some pain, throughout that process to get there, and be willing to do some of the things that are not as illustrious as seeing the big primes win major contracts.
Yeah, that's right. It is fascinating. There's a lot of interesting information out there. I had somebody say to me once, defense is a great way to get rich. It's like, maybe in the movie War Dogs, but generally that's not the That is not the experience of most people, and certainly not on that time frame. If you think about who should not enter the federal market, what sort of company should not play in, whether it's defense or the government broadly, who is this wrong for?
Probably just going back to my previous statement. If you're unwilling to be super flexible, it doesn't matter. I think there's a space for almost any technology that's out there today, right? There's a fit. The military Department of Defense as a whole is its own quasi civilization, right? And it requires every manner of capability. I was chatting with a guy the other day that does analytics for the NFL, and they're looking at the speed and agility of players. Well, I'm like, well, that makes a ton of sense for special operators and for health and fitness and that side of the house. And it's things like that you don't think would actually fit into a military or DoD use case right off the bat that actually have a need on that side to reduce injury and try to keep soldiers and airmen and Marines in the fight longer to extend their shelf life, quite frankly. So stuff like that is super important. But yeah, I mean, if you're looking to take a product that you built that is, you're completely siloed in the way that you're thinking and in the way that you're looking to take this to market, you're going to have a bad time. And that's just how it is. If you're willing to make those investments and to listen to your customers, and, at no point can you do everything, right? And that's the other part, is if you try to do everything, you're going to fail. And there's no doubt about that. But listening to your customers, taking that first step, if you've got guys on your team or gals on your team that have military experience, that sat in the seat, before they got out, listen to them. What does your product not do right now? And what should it do? And if you can listen to that feedback and implement it, you're probably going to have a higher chance of success on the backside.
Gold. It's gold nuggets right there. It's all fantastic stuff. No matter how many times folks hear it, you got to live it. Got to see it for yourself. JT, what are the next few years? What's the next few months and years look like for ZeroEyes? What should we expect to see from you guys?
Yeah, I mean, we're taking off like a rocket ship. It's an unfortunate need, right? And I always come back to the growth that we're seeing. We shouldn't exist, right? This company shouldn't exist. This is an absolutely horrible problem. I think about it every day, about the number of school shootings. January 2nd, right after kids came back from the holiday, Perry, Iowa. They had a mass shooting or an active shooter event at the school where children were killed. And it's absolutely gut wrenching. But on that same token, we take that as like our noble mission of trying to prevent that as best as we can. So I think you're just going to continue to see us grow. We've made significant investments into our team, our culture, and then, on top of that, our certifications, right? We've made that upfront investment, like more probably down the lines of a Series C or Series D company. And we've done that early on to maintain our place as a market leader with things like the Department of Homeland Security Safety Act designation, ISO 27001, SOC 2 certifications. We're working on FedRAMP right now. So a lot of big things coming in that space, in addition to the federal end. In terms of our federal growth, there's a lot of big stuff on the horizon. I think when we have our FedRAMP, we're going to scale pretty exponentially in the federal civilian sector right away, because it's an easy product market fit for our commercial gun detection technology into that space. And then the DoD, as these requirement cycles come about, and as some of the long-term sustained efforts of like our phase 3 and the StratFi come about, we're going to be cemented into some of the requirements for military installations in the future, and that's the goal. So yeah, I mean, a lot of fun stuff on the horizon. I think we're growing like crazy. I said it before. I think I was employee 30 in August of 21. We're at almost 200 employees right now in that short time span. So it's really awesome to see the growth of the company and the good that we're doing out in society.
Company's great. The impact is better. JT, I applaud what you're doing. I think that the line that sticks with me is this company shouldn't exist, but we're glad you do. So thanks for joining us. Keep up the good work and appreciate your time.
Thanks, Noah. Great to be here. Thank you.